Hello and welcome to Reviews. As always, I'm Plume Noir. Last week, the digital version of Clementine Book One was released, followed by the physical book this week. I had pre-ordered both versions accidentally, meaning that by the time my physical copy arrived, I had already read it a couple of times. This is not a good thing. Clementine Book One. It's the first of a trilogy, and it is a canonical continuation of Telltale's Walking Dead Season 4 game. It is written and drawn by Tillie Walden, who is an Eisner Award-winning young adult writer/artist. I've mentioned in previous videos that I am a huge fan of Walking Dead comics and the Telltale games, and they both take place in the same universe. When I ordered the book, I didn't know or maybe realize that Skybound Comet imprint was for YA content, but since it is canon, I decided to read it anyway. Now, I don't normally review YA stuff, but I have a few times in the past. Although, I did find it odd that an M-rated game series would be continued in a YA series. But even my son played the Telltale games when he was about 12, so I figured I'd give the book a chance anyway. Now, before I discuss Clementine Book One, I'm going to take a moment to discuss Skybound X. Skybound X was a comic released in 2021, and the first issue contained a 12-page story that, as Skybound stated, serves as a bridge between the games and Clementine Book One. It shows AJ catching Clementine leaving the Erickson boarding school and Clem explaining why she is doing so. Now, this story angered a lot of people because Clem's characterization goes against all the previous seasons of the Telltale games. So, with that out of the way, I'm going to give a brief overview of the plot and discuss a few points. The story starts out with Clementine walking through the woods and encountering walkers, which she easily dispatches. She continues her trek and comes upon 3 girls from an Amish community who bring her to their town. After getting her prosthetic leg upgraded, like a video game, right? She is given some supplies and continues on her way. Once she is on her way out of town, she meets a local boy named Amos who is heading up to Vermont on the first Rumspringa since the trials began 9 years ago. And the trials is what the zombie apocalypse is called in the comic. And I should note that the time frame isn't given, but Clem was 8 years old when the apocalypse began, as shown in the first season of the game, and she's 17 now. Eventually, Amos shows Clem a printed flyer that was brought to his community the previous year. The flyer is a recruitment ad for workers to spend the winter building homes in a lurker-free environment in Killington, which is a real-life ski resort town, and the ad also promises a free one-way plane ride. Amos states that the man who brought the flyer even flew over the town to prove that the plane was real. And Amos is so enthralled by the idea of flying in a plane, so that's where he is heading. Amos convinces Clem to journey north with him, though she's very reluctant to do so. They continue the journey until they reach the foot of the mountain at Killington. There they are met by 2 twin girls who react very tersely that it's only Amos and Clementine and no one else. For some reason, it's never explained, but the girls refuse to give their names. After one of the twins shoots Amos's horse, Amos and Clem take the ski lift up the mountain and meet the only other person who responded to the ad, which happens to be a girl from Canada named Rika. After settling in, Rika says that she has given the 2 twins nicknames. The one with the ponytail is Right, and the one that wears her hair down is Left. At this point, we're about a third of the way through the book, and for the most of the rest of the book, they work on building houses and fighting the elements, and there is some drama between the characters. And, of course, not everything or everyone is what they appear to be. Now, I will stop here on the plot, but I will address some things in the spoiler section at the end of the video. However, I will say not everyone makes it off the mountain alive. Now, about the book. Before I get too negative, let's talk about the things that I did like in the book. There are a number of little, I call them good moments in the book. For example, the Amish call the zombies devils. That's a nice little detail that seems very appropriate for their religion, which only makes me wish that Walden had Clem spend more time in their town. Left, also known as Olivia, as we find out, and the kitten she adopts. Now, at first I thought this was a callback to when they shot Amos's horse and Clem was told the story about how one of the twins was not able to eat their pet hamster. But then, on the second read-through, I realized I had mistaken which twin was which, as I think Tillie Walden did as well, but I will explain more about that bit in a little bit. So, the kitten scene just ended up seeming more like dark comedy, like Olivia was carrying a snack with her just in case she got hungry. Back to the Amish. Clem has a line where she refers to them as a cult. Now, I'm not making that connection. Not that they'll ever see this video, but it was an interesting insight into Clementine's world. She has only ever run into religious fanatics, so the behavior and demeanor of the Amish people would probably seem very cult-like. Again, missed story opportunity, but how would someone who has seen the worst of humanity handle being around people that strive to be as pious as possible? I'll come back to the art in a few minutes, but I need to point out that some of the wilderness scenes looked pretty good, especially the ones without people in them. Walden is apparently from Vermont, so she probably spent a lot of time practicing drawing outdoor scenes, and frankly, it shows. And one last thing that I enjoyed that not a lot of people would have noticed, but Clem only has about a third grade education. I mean, sure, she's street smart and resourceful, but the scene where Amos is trying to help her read the word improbable, not only does this reinforce the lack of a proper education and childhood that Clem has suffered, but it also really displays what a good person Amos is. Okay. One more thing I need to add to the things that I'd liked. Amos. Now, in theory, his character should really have become grating after a while, especially being a wide-eyed, naive idealist. I have to give Walden credit. He is easily the best character in this book. Hell, he's probably too good for this book. I found myself really enjoying him. Now, let's talk about the not-so-good stuff. Let's talk about which Clem, well, most importantly, which version of Clem this is. Now, as you can see, she must have stayed with Kenny after season 2 due to the scar on her eyebrow there. Oh, wait. Okay, not there. Well, she must have stayed at Wellington because she has that scar on her cheek, which doesn't seem to be there. Okay, well, Clem obviously stayed with Jane since she has AJ's initials tattooed on her right hand. Huh. Well, then she had to have gone off alone because that's the only option left, right? So she'll be missing her left ring finger. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, okay, which version of Clem is this? And where is the dog bite scar from season 2? Did Walden even play the games? Well, at least she still has the New Frontier brand on her arm. You see, one of the roadblocks Walden probably encountered is what version of Clementine should be in the story. Since people will have different versions of their Clementine from different playthroughs and choices, it kind of seems like she just ignored all of what happened at the end of season 4. It was probably easier for her to just start over than to canonize things like whether Clem ended up with Violet or Lewis, or if Ten is still alive. Walden just starts the book with Clem on the road. Want to know why she left the boarding school and doesn't have AJ with her? Well, you'll have to read the aforementioned Skybound X story, which is not included in this book. In fact, there's not even a summary page explaining what happened. Someone with a history of playing the video games that missed that story would just be completely left in the dark and not know how Clem got to point A to point B or why. Now let's talk about the writing. You see, in the Skybound X issue, Clementine leaves Erickson because she's, well, basically not happy. And she leaves AJ behind. You see, previously, Clem was determined to protect AJ no matter what and not to leave him. In that comic, she states that AJ is safe now, especially with the new coalition that Erickson has become part of. Now, this point is later expanded upon in the Clementine book that, with her amputated leg, she feels useless to the people at the boarding school. This flies in the face of what we saw in the Skybound X issue and the beginning of this book. Clem is still a badass. Plus, all the kids there already respected her as a leader. However, reading this book with the knowledge of the games, Clementine seems to have developed a death wish, as if she left the boarding school in order to die. She could have mentioned in this book, or even the Skybound X issue, that Clementine wasn't happy because of a failed relationship, either with Lewis or Violet, which would have dovetailed well into this book, given the genre. As I said, this all had to be thrown away for the story Walden wanted to write. The kids at the boarding school and AJ, they all had to be put in the rearview mirror so Walden could write her coming-of-age tale, which is precisely the problem, because Clementine has already gone through that. People who have played the games have not only watched her grow from a scared 8-year-old girl to a capable and cunning 17-year-old young woman, but players also helped guide her to become the person she is, which, granted, varies from person to person. The point is, fans are very invested in Clementine, and that is a good thing. It's not often that companies can create a character that really captures the hearts of fans. The Clementine featured in this book seems like she's regressed a couple of years. Now, I get it. It's a young adult book, but it's retreading ground that the character has already been through. The book has the character of Rika not so subtly trying to start a relationship with Clem. Now, I'm not bothered by the lesbian implications. Heck, my Clementine chose Violet over Lewis. But Clementine has been in relationships before. Clem may still be a teen and awkward, but this book makes it seem like there's no evidence she's been down this road before. And upon my second read-through, I noticed how unlikable Clementine is in this book. She's very standoffish, which is understandable, being around new people and all, but then you think about how she just left AJ behind. As someone who basically grew up without her parents and Lee, you would think that Clem would want to be there for AJ. And this makes you wonder, does she just run off, leaving a mute boyfriend, Lewis, or blinded girlfriend, Violet, and just left them behind without so much as a goodbye? This Clementine comes off as very selfish throughout the book. In general, the writing for this book is badly paced. In an interview, Walden states that she doesn't work with the script, only outlines for the editor. Trust me, it shows. There are many places where the story just meanders for a while and then suddenly tries to catch up. It almost seems like she was writing and drawing and then realizing, uh-oh, I have to get to point X in 2 or 3 more pages. This becomes a problem near the end of the book, which I'll also touch upon in the spoiler section. Meanwhile, the Amish community scene near the beginning is just there to give Clem a better prosthetic leg and add Amos to the cast. It would have been interesting to see more of how it fared post-apocalypse. And there was a screening process to get into the town, but after that, it just seemed to be a come and go as you please. And there were a lot of chipper people there, like Amos and Meredith. The loss of modern tech would not have been much of an inconvenience to them, but what about the biblical ramifications the trials would have seemed to have brought? The problem, as I mentioned, is that it was obvious that the town was only there for the leg and Amos. It was just a plot sweeper, there to just dump a bunch of stuff onto the character and push her along. This happens several times in the book, such as when Clem runs into the mysterious man named Ted, who is only there to give some background info before becoming infected, or a kitten at the end who makes a noise at the wrong time. The book relies a little too much on coincidences moving the story along. And also, a little nitpick that I would file under writing. The handwritten word balloons look very bad. It makes it seem like everyone's voices are quivering due to the irregular shapes of the balloons. And when someone is hurt or would have a shaky voice, it doesn't stand out. I found it very distracting at times, almost as distracting as a dialogue, which is pretty bad because it often did not feel natural and came off very stilted, or it was just info dumps. And one last thing that really bugged me. Fuel. We're 9 years into the apocalypse, so where would they get the fuel for snowmobiles or airplanes? Aviator fuel that propeller planes use is only good for about a year, and you'd be lucky to get the gasoline used in snowmobiles to last that long as well. Given that these two vehicles are important to the plot, this is an oversight or probably just a mistake, but I couldn't overlook it. As far as the art, oh man. While I did compliment some of the nature scenes, there are many times through the book where I had to puzzle out what was going on or even who was who. Looking back at the story that Tillie Walden did in Skybound X, while the faces are derpy, the art is still pretty clean. That is not the case in this book. There are places where it is hard to figure out what is going on action-wise. And there's also some panels where it's hard to discern who is a human and who is a zombie, which is pretty important for a zombie-themed book. Or how about this, for example? Did you know this is a hat? Even with the context of the previous panel, I thought it was a weirdly shaped rock and not the bottom of a hat in the extreme foreground. And the art seemed to get worse near the end of the book. In fact, the last quarter of the book seemed very rough, almost as if the deadline was approaching too quickly and Walden had to rush through to finish. Or pages like this. In the first 2 panels, they're looking off from a cliff at the houses in the third panel. The characters appear to be looking straight ahead at the houses, but for the action to match, meaning that the third panel should be showing us what they're seeing. But the context of the next few pages suggests that they're actually on the mountain in the background and should be looking down on the houses. This is a problem I had throughout the book, really. I couldn't draw a mental map in my mind's eye as to where locations are to each other or how close or far away any place is. Scenes where characters are out in a storm all night lose their impact if you don't know if they're 2 miles or 15 miles away. Even with multiple read-throughs, I couldn't quite figure it out, and so I just gave up caring. And it seems I was not alone in not caring. Late in the book, Rika is shot. Sorry to spoil that. But as you can see, she is shot in her right side. Afterwards, her wound is on her left side. We know that the bullet didn't go through her torso because it gets removed later on. It's almost Rob Liefeld levels of not caring about what was just drawn a few pages before. But I guess that's what happens when you don't work from a script. And speaking of not being able to tell the difference between left and right, I'm not sure that Tillie Walden can either. You see, Ricka refers to the twins as left and right. Now, that is in itself odd, as it seems kind of arbitrary. We see that she says that the one that wears a ponytail is right, and the one that wears her hair down is left. Now, their names we find out later are Georgia and Olivia, respectively. It seems like ponytail and down would have been better nicknames. But why am I bringing that up? You see, this is what necessitated my second read-through, because I became thoroughly confused by the end of the book. You see, it turns out that the reason for my confusion is that Walden actually switched which twin was which. You see, we know for a fact that left is Olivia from this bit of dialogue. And for story purposes, I'll leave out the context of this sequence that this scene is a part of, because it's a very important scene. But it proves that left, that is Olivia, is the one with the ponytail, and that right, Georgia, is the one with her hair down. Now, I suppose one could argue that Olivia sometimes wears her hair down and that Georgia sometimes ponytails her hair, but you don't nickname your characters like that unless there's some type of mystery involved and you need misdirection. And that is not the case here. This is, once again, something that could be fixed by working from a script. And it makes following their characters and interactions throughout the book very difficult. One more point about the art. Walden added a page where she shows the tools she used to make the book. It's interesting in that she started drawing by digitally penciling on her iPad and then printing her work out on, as she says, cheap cardstock, and she inked her work on paper. Now, I find it interesting that she didn't use pencils on paper, but only inked on the paper. But most importantly, she worked on 8.5 by 11-inch paper. Now, most comic artists use 11 by 17-inch paper stock. This allows for better detail as the artist is not drawing smaller figures, and then the art is shrunk down to comic size. The physical book is 6 inches by 9 inches, not much smaller than an actual comic book. But, however, I can't help but think that that's the reason why the book sometimes looks like drawings one would do in a spiral notebook. It's the media she was drawing on is the same size as a notebook. So how do I feel about this book? Personally, I do not recommend it, especially if you played the games. If you haven't played the games, things like the dream sequences with Lee, they probably won't make as much sense. Personally, I don't see any issues with setting a YA teen romance novel in the Walking Dead universe. In fact, I think you could do it easily, but with a blank slate character. It feels like the only reason Clementine was used was because she's a selling point, as opposed to random teen girl that no one has ever heard of before. I am not sure who this audience for this book, who it really is. Fans who have played the game are probably too old for this genre and will hate the regressed version of Clementine. The YA target audience who haven't played the game may enjoy the story, but they may get disappointed at what an afterthought the zombies really are, or wonder who Lee or AJ or even Kenny are. Well, I've come to the end, so thanks for watching. I want to talk about a few spoiler points now, so if you don't want parts of the ending spoiled, feel free to stop watching now, and I will see you next time. Thanks for sticking around to the spoiler section. I won't go into detail, but there are just a couple things I want to address in my review, but I didn't want to ruin any so-called twist or the ending. I've complained about the pacing of the book. I feel that Walden should have stopped when Georgia was defeated and ended the book with the dressing of Rika's wound. But she still had about 30 pages of the book to fill to get to the ending where they fly away on the plane. The sneaking into the twins' mother's house was way too quick. Given that we've only been given partial details of what the story behind the twins is, it feels like we're left with too many questions as to how a house is fortified with barbed wire and towers, yet has a hangar and a runway long enough for takeoff, and that the plane is fueled and ready to go at a moment's notice. And who's that guy that Clem clocked? And who are the rest of the people trying to stop the plane? They look like they might be armed, but they may also be zombies. You can't really tell by the silhouettes. Ted's exposition dump alluded to the idea that the twins were trying to restart the plan to build a refuge again, but the original plan fell apart due to a hard winter. So, did the mother and her group just give up and hunker down? What exactly is their story? Because the pacing only allowed for a couple dozen pages to get to the plane and get it in the air, the characters must speed run through the barricades, into the house, and to the hangar. Let me describe these three girls. One has 1.5 legs, one has a bullet wound, and one has a kitten in her coat, and the kitten seems to only be there to alert others to their presence. None of them are exactly Solid Snake in their conditions. But, well, there were only 30 pages left to fill. The other thing that really bugged me, well, other than Amos dying for a stupid reason, a jealous sister, was Clementine's plan to rescue Olivia from Georgia. Now, I've read it several times, and it still doesn't make much sense. You see, the plan hinges on confusing Georgia with a zombie at the door. Where did the zombie come from? You see, it seems like Clem and Rika are waiting things out as the weather got worse and it grew darker. And the art and writing make it look like they were just waiting for the zombie to show up while they had their little heart-to-heart conversation. Now, did Clem just stumble upon the buried zombie and remembered it? And if so, it seems like she and Rika spent way too much time chatting instead of going out and finding a zombie or prepping the zombie. And this buried zombie, did they unbury it, and did Clem lure it to the front door? Or was it just a coincidence that it was there when Clem busted a side window? Or was it, as the Everything Wrong with the Walking Dead games calls it, teleporting zombies? Here's another situation where the art gets bad and it makes it really hard to follow along with what's going on. And that's not even getting into Georgia's actions. Okay, the twin jealous of the boy her sister falls in love with, so she kills him. Okay, that plot makes sense. It's stupid as hell, but I get it. But what was her plan with her sister? Was she tied up just as bait for Clem and Rika? Was she planning on killing her too? Because it was a fit of rage without a plan and she was just going to go with the flow? I mean, Georgia sure seemed to have no problems curb stomping Olivia after she pushed Amos off the cliff. So was she going to finish her off? What exactly was going on there? There are many, many more things I could bring up, like whose house was it that they were looking at the mountaintop? Obviously someone was there. It could not have been the twins' mother's house, and there was smoke coming from the chimney. Whose was it? And has Ted just been living in that crevasse all this time? Where's he getting food from? But I think I've said enough to justify that this book is definitely a hard pass. So as I said before, again, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.